The dusty streets of Westcliffe, Colorado ran red with fever in the summer of 1882, and Natalie Carson knew she was the only thing standing between the townspeople and death itself. She had arrived 3 weeks earlier on the afternoon stage, carrying nothing but 2 worn leather satchels filled with dried herbs, tinctures in amber bottles, and the medical knowledge her grandmother had spent 18 years teaching her. The town had been desperate then. Children burning with scarlet fever, men coughing blood from mine dust, women dying in childbirth because the only doctor had succumbed to pneumonia during the harsh winter. Natalie had set up shop in an abandoned mercantile building, hanging a simple sign that read Herbalist and asking for nothing in return. The first patient had been a child, a boy of 7 whose mother wept as she carried him through the door. Natalie had worked through the night, brewing willow bark tea for the fever, applying cool compresses of peppermint and lavender, speaking soft words of comfort until the crisis passed. By dawn, the boy's fever had broken, and his mother had tried to pay her with the only thing she had, a tarnished locket that held pictures of her dead husband. "Keep it," Natalie had said, pressing the locket back into the woman's calloused hands. "Your son's health is payment enough." Word spread like wildfire through the mining town. The herbalist didn't charge. She treated everyone, from the poorest prospector to the saloon girls nobody else would touch. Her waiting room, such as it was, filled before sunrise each morning. She worked until her fingers cramped from grinding herbs, until her back ached from bending over sick beds, until her eyes burned from reading by candlelight in her medical journals. She was 22 years old, exhausted beyond measure, and running out of supplies. Samuel Turner first laid eyes on her on a Thursday morning in late July, when the sun had already turned the streets into shimmering rivers of heat. He had ridden into Westcliffe to sell a string of horses to the mining company, his saddlebags heavy with cash and his plans simple: conclude his business, have a decent meal, and ride back to his ranch, 20 miles south before nightfall. He was a man who kept to himself, 25 years old with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His father had died 2 years prior, leaving him the ranch and a healthy suspicion of towns and the complications they brought. But then he saw her stumble. She had been crossing the street, those 2 leather satchels in her hands, heading toward the general store. The heat and exhaustion caught up with her all at once, and her knees buckled. Samuel moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. She weighed next to nothing, all bones and determination in a faded blue dress that had been mended a dozen times. "Easy now," he said, steadying her. "When did you last eat?" Natalie looked up at the stranger holding her arms. He was tall, solid as the mountains that ringed the town, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been carved from granite if not for the genuine concern in his eyes. "I'm fine," she said, trying to pull away. "I just need to get to the store before it closes for the afternoon." "The store's not going anywhere. You look like you're about to blow away." He didn't release her, just shifted his grip to something more supportive. "When did you last eat?" he asked again, his voice firmer this time. She couldn't remember. Yesterday morning, the day before. Time had blurred into an endless stream of patience and preparations. "The cafe's right there," Samuel said, making the decision for her. "You're going to sit down and you're going to eat a proper meal." "I don't have time," Natalie protested, but her body betrayed her. Her stomach growled loud enough for both of them to hear, and despite herself, she felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Make time," he said, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. Not harsh, but absolutely certain. He guided her toward the small cafe, his hand steady at her elbow. and she found herself too tired to resist. The cafe owner, a round woman named Martha who Natalie had treated for arthritis just last week, took one look at her and started fussing. Within minutes, Natalie was seated at a corner table with a plate of roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread with butter, and a tall glass of cool milk in front of her. Samuel sat across from her, his own meal untouched as he watched her try to eat slowly and fail miserably. "When's the last time you slept?" he asked. Natalie swallowed a bite of bread. "I sleep." "That's not what I asked." She set down her fork and really looked at him. Most men who tried to tell her what to do wanted something in return, expected gratitude in forms she had no intention of giving. But this cowboy just looked worried, his weathered hands folded on the table, waiting for an answer. 3 hours, maybe 4, she admitted. "There are too many people who need help. The Gunderson baby has colic, old Mr. Peterson's lungs are failing, and Mrs. Chen is 8 months pregnant with complications. I can't just stop." "You're going to kill yourself," Samuel said bluntly. "Then who's going to help them?" It was the same argument she'd been having with herself for weeks, but hearing it from someone else made it real in a way she couldn't ignore. Her hands started shaking and she put down the glass of milk before she spilled it. "I don't know what else to do," she said quietly. "They need help, and I'm all they have." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching her with those storm cloud eyes. Then he said something that would change everything. "Let me take care of you." Natalie's head snapped up. "What? You're taking care of the whole town? Let me take care of you." He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "I've got a ranch south of here, doing well enough that I've got time and money to spare. Let me help. I can bring in supplies, help you organize, make sure you're eating and sleeping. You can't pour from an empty cup." "You don't even know me," she said, bewildered. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Samuel said simply. "And because I've been watching people take and take from good folks my whole life without giving back. You're giving everything you have, asking for nothing. Somebody should be looking after you." Something in Natalie's chest cracked open. A dam she hadn't known she was holding against the flood of exhaustion and loneliness. She had been alone for so long, first after her grandmother's death, then traveling from town to town trying to help where she could. Nobody had ever offered to help her. Nobody had ever noticed that she might need it. "I can't pay you," she said, her voice rough. "Did I ask for payment?" Samuel picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, set it down with deliberate care. "I'm not offering charity, Miss Carson, Natalie Carson, Miss Carson, Samuel Turner." He nodded at her like they were making a business deal. "I'm offering partnership. You keep doing what you're doing and I'll make sure you're able to keep doing it. Simple as that." Nothing in Natalie's life had ever been simple, but looking at this cowboy with his steady eyes and calloused hands, she found herself wanting to believe. "Just until I get back on my feet," she said. "Just until I can manage on my own again." Samuel smiled, just a small curve of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. "Just until then," he agreed, and they both knew it was already a lie. He started that very afternoon. While Natalie returned to her makeshift clinic, Samuel made the rounds of every store in Westcliffe, talking to owners, asking questions about what the herbalist needed most. By evening, he'd arranged for credit at the general store for her supplies, paid for a month's worth of meals to be delivered to her from the cafe, and hired a teenage boy named Tommy to help her with the heavy lifting and cleaning. When he appeared at her door as the sun was setting, his arms full of packages, Natalie could only stare. "Golden seal root," Samuel said, setting the first package on her work table. "The store owner said you'd been asking for it. Also boneset, comfrey, and something called slippery elm bark. I wrote down everything you might need, and I'll ride to Denver next week to get whatever else isn't available here." "This must have cost a fortune," Natalie whispered, running her hands over the precious supplies. "I've got a fortune to spend," Samuel said. "What good is money if you don't use it for something that matters?" She looked up at him, this stranger who had walked into her life just hours ago, and felt something shift in her chest. "Why are you really doing this?" Samuel met her eyes, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Because the moment I caught you, I knew I wasn't going to be able to walk away." The honesty of it struck her silent. He didn't try to soften it with prettier words, didn't make excuses. Just the plain truth laid out between them like a hand of cards. "I don't know what to say," she said finally. "Don't say anything yet," Samuel replied. "Just let me help. The rest can wait." But the rest didn't wait, couldn't wait, because life in Westcliffe moved fast and pulled them together like a current neither could resist. Samuel started staying in town, taking a room at the boarding house so he could be available when Natalie needed him. He was there in the early mornings to help her set up for patients, there in the late evenings to make sure she ate dinner and got at least a few hours of sleep. He learned to grind herbs under her instruction, to measure tinctures precisely, to keep her workspace organized so she could find things quickly in an emergency. He also learned about her. She had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died of cholera when she was 4. Her grandmother, a Cherokee woman who had married a white doctor, taught her everything about healing with plants, about listening to the body and treating the whole person, not just the symptoms. Natalie had grown up between two worlds, never quite fitting in either, using her father's last name to avoid some of the prejudice her grandmother's heritage would have brought. "She died 2 years ago," Natalie told him one night as they prepared poultices for the next day. "I was 20, thought I knew everything. Turned out I didn't know anything about how to be alone." Samuel, grinding dried lavender in a mortar, said, "I lost my father 2 years ago too, left me a ranch and a whole lot of questions about what I was supposed to do with my life." "Have you figured it out?" she asked. He looked at her, his hands stilling on the pestle. "Starting to." The air between them felt charged, full of things unspoken. Natalie forced herself to look away, focusing on her work. It was too soon, too fast. She had known this man for barely 2 weeks. But her heart didn't seem to care about timing. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Westcliffe, nothing stayed secret for long. People talked about the cowboy who had taken up residence to help the herbalist, speculated about his intentions, wondered if there was more than charity at work. The more cynical suggested he was after her virtue, but that talk died quickly when anyone who watched them together could see the respectful distance Samuel maintained. The way he never touched her unless necessary, the careful propriety he observed. What they didn't see were the quiet moments that built something deeper than gossip could reach. They didn't see the morning Samuel brought her coffee exactly how she liked it without having to ask, having paid attention to how she prepared it herself. They didn't see the afternoon Natalie laughed so hard at one of his dry observations about a pompous mine owner that she nearly dropped a bottle of expensive rose oil, and how Samuel had caught it without thinking, their fingers brushing in the save. They didn't see the evening when an elderly patient, confused with fever, called Natalie granddaughter, and how she had cried afterward when she thought no one was watching, or how Samuel had simply sat with her until the tears stopped, offering no empty platitudes, just solid presence. 3 weeks after Samuel Turner walked into her life, Natalie admitted to herself that she was falling in love with him. It terrified her. She had never had time for romance, had never trusted that any man would accept her work, her dedication to healing, her mixed heritage that some people still whispered about. She had built her life around being alone, around needing no one. Samuel was dismantling all of that just by showing up, day after day, asking nothing, giving everything. The crisis came on a Monday morning when the mine had a collapse. The whistle blew at 10 in the morning, the long, desperate sound that meant disaster. Natalie was already treating patients when the first injured men started arriving, carried by their fellows, covered in dust and blood. Broken bones, crushing injuries, one man with a piece of timber through his shoulder. She moved into the controlled chaos of emergency medicine, her training taking over, calling out instructions to Tommy and Samuel as they became her impromptu assistants. Samuel had never seen her like this. Gone was the exhausted, gentle woman who treated patients with soft words and careful hands. In her place was a surgeon, decisive and brilliant, her hands steady as she set bones, stitched wounds, made life or death decisions with calm certainty. She worked for 6 hours straight, saving lives through skill and determination, and Samuel fell the rest of the way in love watching her do it. When the last patient was stabilized, when the families had been notified and the dead had been taken to the undertaker, Natalie finally stopped. She stood in the middle of her clinic, surrounded by bloody bandages and the tools of her trade, and started shaking. Samuel moved to her side, but she held up a hand. "Don't, if you're kind to me right now, I'll fall apart, and I can't afford to fall apart yet." "The work's done," he said gently. "You can fall apart now. There were 5 men I couldn't save." Her voice was hollow. 5 families that will be grieving tonight because I wasn't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough." "You saved 12 lives today," Samuel said. 12 men are going home to their families because of you. It's not enough." Her hands were still shaking, stained with other people's blood despite the number of times she had washed them. "It's never enough." Samuel stepped closer, slow and careful, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't move. "Natalie," he said, using her first name for the first time. "You're one woman. You can't save everyone, but the people you do save. Their children will grow up with fathers. Their wives won't go hungry. You gave them that. You gave them everything." Something broke in her then, the iron control shattering. She turned into him and he caught her, pulled her against his chest and held her while she cried. Great, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep, releasing weeks of exhaustion and fear, and the impossible weight of holding so many lives in her hands. He didn't tell her to stop, didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her, one hand in her hair, the other firm against her back, keeping her together while she broke apart. When the storm passed, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. His shirt was wet with her tears, his face creased with concern. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said, and then, because he couldn't help himself anymore, because the moment demanded honesty, he added, "I'm in love with you." Natalie's breath caught. "Samuel." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you probably don't feel the same way, and I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere whether you love me back or not." She reached up, her hand trembling as she touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "What if I told you it wasn't too soon?" she asked. "What if I told you I've been falling in love with you since the moment you wouldn't let me skip lunch?" Hope blazed in his eyes, bright and urgent. "Then I'd ask if I could kiss you." "Yes," she breathed, and he did. It was gentle at first, careful and questioning, but when she pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the words they hadn't said, all the moments they'd been dancing around each other, all the longing they'd been trying to ignore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you proper, let everyone know my intentions. I want to marry you, Natalie Carson, if you'll have me." "That's moving fast," she said, but she was smiling, truly smiling for the first time in weeks. "Life's too short to move slow," Samuel replied. "I learned that when I lost my father. When you find something real, you hold on to it." "I have nothing to bring to a marriage," Natalie said, the practical part of her brain reasserting itself. "No dowry, no property, and I won't give up my work. I can't be a traditional wife, Samuel. I need to keep healing people." "I don't want a traditional wife," he said firmly. "I want you. All of you, including the work that makes you who you are. We'll figure out the rest together." She kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise. "Then yes, yes, I'll marry you." The town of Westcliffe had a new topic of conversation that evening, and this time it was joyful. The herbalist and the cowboy were courting, officially and openly, and anyone with eyes could see they were desperately in love. Samuel moved through the town with Natalie on his arm whenever she had a spare moment, making his intentions clear to everyone. He bought her a ring from the jeweler, nothing fancy but solid and real, a gold band with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. They were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony at the small church, with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore a dress that Samuel had commissioned from the seamstress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar, and she carried wildflowers that he had picked himself that morning. When the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and there wasn't a dry eye in the building. The reception was held at the cafe, with food and dancing and more goodwill than Natalie had known existed. The people she had treated brought gifts, simple things because most of them had little to give, but each one chosen with care. A quilt from Mrs. Chen, who had safely delivered her baby 2 weeks prior with Natalie's help. A set of hand-carved spoons from Mr. Peterson, who was breathing easier thanks to her treatments. A drawing from the 7-year-old boy she had saved from scarlet fever, showing her and Samuel holding hands under a rainbow. "You've made quite an impact," Samuel said as they danced, his hand warm at her waist. "We've made an impact," Natalie corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Partners," he said, echoing that first conversation in the cafe. "Partners," she agreed. They spent their wedding night at Samuel's ranch, riding out in the late afternoon so they could arrive before dark. Natalie had never seen the place, and she fell in love with it immediately. It wasn't grand, just a solid house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals for the horses, and a view of the mountains that took her breath away. Inside, the house was clean but sparse, clearly the home of a man who spent most of his time working. "We can change anything you want," Samuel said, watching her take it in. "Make it however you need it to be." Natalie turned to him, this man who was now her husband, and felt a rush of love so strong it almost hurt. "I need a room for medicine," she said. "Somewhere I can work, store supplies, treat people who can't make it to town." "The back room has good light," Samuel said immediately. "We can set it up however you need." She crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his neck. "Have I mentioned that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," he said, pulling her close. "Might want to remedy that." "I love you," she said, and kissed him until words became unnecessary. They made love for the first time with the windows open to the Colorado breeze, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they brought to everything else. Samuel was gentle but passionate, attuned to every response, determined to bring her pleasure. Natalie discovered that her husband was patient and thorough, that he took his time and paid attention, that he cared more about her satisfaction than his own. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, she traced patterns on his chest and said, "I didn't know it could be like this." "Like what?" His voice was drowsy content, safe, good, right. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I've heard so many women talk about enduring their marriage bed, about duty and obligation, but this was beautiful." Samuel's expression went soft. "It's supposed to be beautiful when two people love each other." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It'll only get better, too. We've got a whole lifetime to learn what makes each other happy." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Natalie slept better than she had in years. The next weeks established their new routine. They spent 3 days a week at the ranch, where Natalie set up her second clinic and treated the ranching families scattered across the territory, people who had even less access to medicine than the town dwellers. The other 4 days they stayed in Westcliffe, where Natalie continued her work at the original clinic, and Samuel managed the business side of things, ordering supplies, keeping records, and gently but firmly insisting that people pay what they could, even if it was just eggs or vegetables from a garden. "You deserve to be compensated for your work," he told her when she protested. "Not payment that hurts anyone, but something. Your knowledge and time have value." "My grandmother always said healing was a gift meant to be shared," Natalie argued, "and it is. You're sharing it." Samuel pulled her into his arms, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "But even healers need to eat, need supplies, need to keep a roof over their heads. You're not being selfish by accepting fair payment. You're being sustainable." She knew he was right, even if it went against her instincts. Together, they worked out a system where people paid what they could, and for those who truly had nothing, there was still treatment freely given. It meant money was tight sometimes, but between Samuel's ranch income and the clinic they managed, they were happy. Remarkably, unexpectedly happy. Natalie learned that Samuel sang while he worked, old songs his mother had taught him, slightly off-key but earnest. She learned that he was afraid of spiders despite being entirely fearless around 1,000-pound horses. She learned that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching, and that he had a gift for gentling difficult animals with nothing but patience and soft words. Samuel learned that Natalie talked to her plants while preparing medicines, thanking them for their healing properties. He learned that she had nightmares sometimes about the patients she couldn't save, and that the best thing he could do was hold her and let her talk it out. He learned that she had a sharp sense of humor that appeared when she was tired, and that she sang Cherokee lullabies her grandmother had taught her when she thought she was alone. They learned each other's bodies, too, discovering pleasure in the privacy of their bedroom, finding joy in the simple act of being close. Some nights they made love with urgent passion, other nights with slow, sweet tenderness, and some nights they just held each other, content with presence alone. 6 months into their marriage, in late January when the Colorado winter had Westcliffe locked in snow, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She noticed first when the smell of coffee, which she normally loved, suddenly made her nauseous. Then came the exhaustion that felt different from her usual tiredness, deeper and more demanding. When she missed her monthly courses, she knew. She waited to tell Samuel until she was certain, using her own knowledge to confirm what her body was telling her. When she was sure, she chose a quiet evening when they were alone at the ranch, the fire crackling in the hearth and snow falling steadily outside. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting aside the socks she was mending. Samuel looked up from the harness he was repairing, his face immediately concerned. "Everything all right? Everything's fine. Better than fine." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." She watched the news hit him, saw his eyes go wide, his hands still on the leather. We're going to have a baby. In late summer, I think. August, maybe early September." He set down the harness carefully, stood up, crossed to where she sat, and dropped to his knees in front of her chair. His hands came to rest on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "We made a person." Natalie laughed, the sound bright with joy and nerves. "We did. Are you happy?" "Happy." He looked up at her and she saw tears in his eyes. "Natalie, I'm terrified and thrilled and so damn grateful I can barely breathe. A baby, our baby." She leaned forward, kissing him softly. "I'm scared too. What if I'm not a good mother? What if something goes wrong?" "You'll be an amazing mother," Samuel said firmly. "You heal people for a living, take care of everyone you meet. Our child is going to be so loved, so wanted. And nothing's going to go wrong, because I'm going to take care of you every single day until that baby arrives healthy and screaming." "You can't promise that," she said, because she knew too much about childbirth, about all the things that could go wrong. "I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make it so," he replied, "and that you won't go through any of it alone." He kept that promise through the months that followed. As Natalie's body changed, as her energy waned and the pregnancy became obvious, Samuel adjusted everything to accommodate her needs. He hired a young woman named Sarah to help in the clinic, giving Natalie space to rest when she needed it. He took over more of the physical work, the lifting and grinding and preparation of bulk supplies. He made sure she ate, made sure she slept, made sure she never pushed herself too hard. The town rallied around them too. The women who Natalie had helped through their own pregnancies now came with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The men built a beautiful cradle that appeared on their porch one morning, unsigned but clearly crafted with care. Even the saloon girls, who society usually shunned, brought by soft blankets they had knitted during the slow hours. "You never judged us," one of them said, a woman named Rose who Natalie had treated for pneumonia. "You saw us as people. We won't forget that." Spring turned to summer, and Natalie grew rounder and more uncomfortable. The heat was oppressive, and there were days she felt like she couldn't breathe. Samuel fashioned a cooling wrap that she could wear around her neck, kept a basin of cold water nearby for soaking her feet, and read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "Tell me about your father," she said one night as they lay in bed, Samuel's hand on her swollen belly feeling the baby kick. "He was a hard man," Samuel said slowly. "Not cruel, but tough. Life made him that way. He came west with nothing, built the ranch from scratch. He wanted me to be strong, independent, able to survive anything." "Did he tell you he loved you?" "Not in words," Samuel admitted. "But in actions, yeah. He taught me everything he knew, made sure I could run the ranch on my own. When he got sick, right before he died, he told me to find something worth building a life for. Said being alone made a man hard in bad ways." "I'm glad you found something," Natalie murmured, her eyes drifting closed. "Found someone," Samuel corrected, kissing her forehead. "Best thing I ever did was walk into that cafe and refuse to let you skip a meal." She smiled, already half asleep. "Best thing I ever did was let you." In late August, on a Tuesday morning when the air was thick with the promise of afternoon thunderstorms, Natalie's labor began. She was at the clinic in town, thank goodness, when the first contraction hit. She had been treating a child for an ear infection, and she barely managed to finish before the pain doubled her over. Sarah, who had been watching Natalie like a hawk for weeks, immediately sent Tommy running for Samuel while she helped Natalie to the back room where they had set up a bed for exactly this purpose. Samuel arrived at a gallop, his horse lathered and his face pale with fear. He burst through the clinic door like the building was on fire. "Natalie!" "I'm fine," she called from the back room, then gasped as another contraction hit. "Or I will be. This is normal, Samuel. Labor is supposed to hurt." He appeared in the doorway, looking lost. "What do I do?" "Boil water," Sarah said briskly, taking charge. Lots of it. And get clean towels from the supply closet. Mrs. Turner, you need to lie down now." Natalie wanted to argue that she knew what she needed better than anyone, but another contraction stole her breath. Labor was different when it was your own body, she discovered. All her medical knowledge couldn't quite prepare her for the reality of it. The hours that followed blurred together into a haze of pain and effort. Samuel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when she snapped at him that it was his fault she was in this position. Sarah managed the medical side with calm efficiency, checking Natalie's progress, coaching her through contractions, making sure everything was proceeding normally. It was late afternoon when the pushing stage began. The thunderstorm had arrived, rain lashing the windows and thunder shaking the building. Natalie was exhausted, soaked with sweat, certain she couldn't do this for another moment when Sarah said, "The baby's crowning. One more push, maybe two." "I can't," Natalie gasped. "You can," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." She looked at him, this man who had given her everything, who had stood by her through every moment, and found the strength she didn't know she had left. When the next contraction came, she bore down with everything in her, and felt the impossible sensation of her baby entering the world. The cry was immediate and lusty, a strong, healthy wail that was the most beautiful sound Natalie had ever heard. Sarah worked quickly, cutting the cord, cleaning the baby, wrapping the tiny body in soft blankets. "You have a son," she said, placing the baby in Natalie's arms. "A beautiful, perfect son." Natalie looked down at her child, this tiny person with Samuel's nose and a shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Tears streamed down her face as she counted 10 fingers, 10 toes, checked him over with a healer's eye and a mother's love. "He's perfect," she whispered. Samuel, who had been silent since the baby's first cry, leaned over to look at his son. His face was wet with tears, his expression one of absolute awe. "We have a son," he said, his voice breaking. "Natalie, we have a son. Do you want to hold him?" she asked. Samuel's hands shook as he took the baby, cradling him with the same care he'd shown gentling wild horses. The baby's crying settled, his tiny face scrunching up as he looked at his father. "Hello," Samuel said softly. "I'm your father, and I love you more than I knew I could love anything. You're safe and wanted, and you're going to have such a good life." Natalie watched her husband fall in love with their child and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They named him Jacob Thomas Turner, Thomas after Samuel's father. He was a good baby, healthy and growing well, though he had a set of lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. Natalie recovered from the birth quickly, her medical knowledge serving her well, and within a few weeks she was back to seeing patients, though at a reduced schedule. Samuel had never been happier. He loved being a father, loved every moment of it, from the midnight feedings to the diaper changes that Natalie had been surprised he insisted on doing himself. "He's my son too," Samuel said when she tried to take over. "I'm not going to be one of those fathers who doesn't help with the hard parts." They fell into a new rhythm, the three of them. Natalie worked mornings at the clinic while Samuel watched Jacob. Then they switched in the afternoons so Samuel could tend to ranch business. Evenings were family time, spent together, with Jacob sleeping in his cradle nearby while his parents talked and planned and dreamed. "I want more," Samuel said one night when Jacob was 3 months old. They were lying in bed, the baby asleep in the next room, the house quiet around them. "More what?" Natalie asked, though she suspected she knew. "More children, more of this, a house full of kids and love and noise." He propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. If you want that too, I know pregnancy is hard and I'd never pressure you. I want that too, Natalie said, smiling. A big family, brothers and sisters for Jacob. But maybe let's wait until he's sleeping through the night consistently. Samuel laughed and pulled her close. Deal. The years that followed were full and rich. Jacob grew into a bright, curious toddler who was fascinated by his mother's work and his father's horses. When he was 2, Natalie became pregnant again, and this time delivered a daughter they named Rose Marie, after the saloon girl who had shown her such kindness. Rose was followed 2 years later by another son, Peter Samuel, and 2 years after that by twin girls, Emma and Grace. 5 children, a thriving clinic, and a successful ranch kept Natalie and Samuel busy every moment of every day, but they had never been happier. The children grew up understanding that their mother healed people, that it was important work, and they helped however they could as they got older. Jacob showed a particular aptitude for medicine, reading his mother's books and asking endless questions. Rose had her father's gift with animals. Peter was mechanical, always figuring out how things worked. The twins were still young but showed signs of being forces of nature. The clinic continued to serve Westcliffe and the surrounding area. Sarah had become a full partner in the work, having learned enough under Natalie's tutelage to handle most cases herself. Together, they had built something sustainable, something that would outlast them both. People still paid what they could, and the truly desperate were still treated freely. But the system Samuel had established years ago meant the clinic could support itself and its workers. Samuel's ranch had grown too, becoming known for producing quality horses. He had hired reliable hands to help with the work, men who understood that their boss prioritized his family and respected him for it. He still worked hard, but he was always home for dinner, always there for important moments, always present in his children's lives in a way his own father had never managed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Natalie took a rare day away from work and children, leaving the kids with Sarah and her husband, riding out to a meadow in the mountains where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. "You remember when we first met?" Samuel asked as they sat in the grass, their horses grazing nearby. "You mean when you wouldn't let me skip lunch?" Natalie laughed. "I was so annoyed with you. Who was this cowboy who thought he could tell me what to do?" "I took one look at you and knew my life had just changed," Samuel said. "Knew I'd never be the same. Were you right?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "More than I ever imagined." He kissed the top of her head. "Best 10 years of my life. Best decision I ever made was telling you to let me take care of you." "Best decision I ever made was letting you," Natalie said, echoing the words she'd said on their wedding night. They made love in the meadow, slow and sweet and familiar, a decade of knowing each other making every touch effortless. Afterward, lying in the grass watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky, Natalie said, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" Samuel's fingers were playing with her hair, the gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "I've never regretted a single moment. Not the hard parts, not the exhausting parts, not even the parts where I was so tired I thought I might collapse, because I got to do it all with you." Samuel rolled to face her, his expression serious. "I love you more now than I did the day we married. Didn't think that was possible, but every year, every day, I fall deeper. Watching you be a mother, watching you heal people, watching you be exactly who you are without apology. You're extraordinary, Natalie Carson Turner." She kissed him, tasting salt and sweetness and home. "You're not so bad yourself, Cowboy." They rode back to town as the sun was setting, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were waiting at home, probably running Sarah ragged. and tomorrow would bring new patients and ranch work and all the demands of their busy lives. But tonight, riding side by side down the mountain trail, Natalie felt nothing but gratitude for the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays and everyday moments that made up a life. Jacob decided at 16 that he wanted to be a doctor, a real one with formal training, and Natalie helped him apply to medical school back east. It was hard to let him go, but she was proud beyond measure when he was accepted. Rose took over more of the ranch work, her gift with horses making her invaluable to Samuel. Peter built a water system that made irrigation easier for half the farms in the county. The twins, now teenagers, were learning medicine from their mother, showing every sign of following in her footsteps. Samuel's hair went gray at the temples, and Natalie found silver strands in her dark braids. They moved a little slower, needed a little more sleep, but they were healthy and content. The clinic had expanded, now occupying a proper building with multiple rooms and newer equipment. Natalie had trained 3 other herbalists who worked alongside her, ensuring that no one person bore the burden alone the way she once had, on a spring morning in 1902. 20 years after they had first met, Natalie woke to find Samuel already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said, his hands covering hers. "How lucky we've been, how fast time goes. How I want to make sure you know, every single day, how much you mean to me." She moved to stand beside him, and he pulled her close. They stood together in the early light, watching their land wake up, listening to the sounds of their children starting to stir in their rooms, a lifetime of love evident in the comfortable silence between them. "I know," Natalie said finally. "I've always known. From that first moment in the cafe when you wouldn't let me walk away, when you said you'd take care of me. You've been doing that every day since, even as I've been taking care of you right back. That's what love is, Samuel, taking care of each other." "That's what it is," he agreed, and kissed her as the sun rose over the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would stand long after they were gone, testaments to the enduring nature of love when it's built on partnership, respect, and choosing each other, every single day. Years later, when Jacob returned from medical school with a degree and a heart full of his mother's passion for healing, he found his parents sitting on the porch of the ranch house, their hands intertwined, watching the sunset. They looked older, moved slower, but the way they looked at each other hadn't changed at all. It was the same look Jacob had seen his entire childhood, the same look that had taught him what love should be. "Tell me the story again," Jacob said, settling into a chair beside them. "How you two met." Samuel and Natalie exchanged a glance, that wordless communication that came from decades together. Natalie began, "Your father found me about to collapse in the middle of Main Street, running myself into the ground trying to help everyone. And I did what any sensible man would do," Samuel continued. "I told her to let me take care of her. I thought he was crazy," Natalie said, laughing. "This cowboy I'd never met offering to help for no reason." "There was a reason," Samuel said, squeezing her hand. "Best reason in the world." I looked at her and I knew, just knew. "Knew what?" Jacob asked, though he'd heard this story 100 times. "That she was my future," Samuel said simply. "That every choice I'd made, every road I'd traveled had led me to that exact moment, and that I'd be a fool to let her walk away." "He wouldn't let me skip lunch," Natalie added, her eyes twinkling. "Forced me to sit down and eat a proper meal. I was so annoyed." "But you let me," Samuel said. "I let you," Natalie confirmed, "and everything changed." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that had no names. And Jacob thought about all the patients his mother had saved, all the lives she had touched, all the good that had come from one cowboy's decision to stop a tired herbalist from working herself to death. "I want that," Jacob said quietly. "What you two have, that kind of love. You'll find it," Natalie said with certainty. "When you're not looking, when you least expect it, someone will walk into your life and change everything. That's how the best things happen." Samuel stood, offering his hand to his wife. "Come on, Nat. Let's go inside, getting chilly." She took his hand, letting him pull her up, their movements synchronized after so many years together. As they walked toward the house, his arm around her shoulders and hers around his waist, Jacob heard his father say something that made his mother laugh, that bright, joyful sound that had been the soundtrack of Jacob's childhood. Inside the house, the rest of the family gathered for dinner. Rose was talking about a particularly difficult horse she'd been working with. Peter was drawing plans for a new barn design. The twins were arguing about something inconsequential in the way that twins did. It was loud and chaotic and full of love. At the head of the table, Samuel looked at Natalie across the plates and dishes and reaching hands and smiled. She smiled back, and in that moment, everything they'd been through, everything they'd built together, was present in the room. The struggling herbalist and the cowboy who'd refused to let her struggle alone had created this, a legacy of love and service and family that would ripple outward long after they were gone. That night, lying in bed in the dark, Natalie said, "Do you remember what you told me the day we met?" "When you offered to help, let me take care of you," Samuel said, the words as clear now as they'd been 2 decades prior. "You've been doing that for 20 years, Natalie said softly. "Every single day you've taken care of me. It's been easy," Samuel replied, pulling her closer. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. Even when I'm stubborn, especially then." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Your stubbornness saved lives, built a legacy. I wouldn't change a thing about you." She turned in his arms, finding his face in the darkness, tracing features she knew better than her own. "I love you, Samuel Turner. Today, tomorrow, forever." "Forever," he agreed, and kissed her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding night, proof that some things only got better with time. In the years that followed, Westcliffe continued to grow and change. The mine played out eventually, and some people moved on, but the town survived, adapting and evolving. Through it all, the clinic Natalie had started remained a constant, serving generation after generation. When she finally retired at the age of 65, 3 of her children had taken over the work, continuing her legacy of healing with compassion and skill. Samuel ran the ranch until he was 70, then gradually handed over control to Rose, who managed it with the same care and attention her father had shown. He still rode every morning, though, unable to give up the habit of a lifetime, just moving a little slower, taking a little more time. Their grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the herbalist who healed for free and the cowboy who'd taken care of her. Those stories became part of family legend, told and retold, teaching each new generation about love and service and the importance of taking care of each other. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the town of Westcliffe threw a celebration in their honor. Half the people there owed their lives or their health to Natalie's care over the years. The other half were connected through family or business to Samuel's ranch. They had touched so many lives, helped so many people, that the gathering overflowed the church and spilled into the street. "Speech," someone called, and the cry was taken up by others. Samuel stood, his hair fully white now, his weathered face creased with lines that spoke of years spent outdoors and even more years spent smiling. He helped Natalie to her feet, holding her hand as he addressed the crowd. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice still strong despite his years. "But I want to say thank you. Thank you for welcoming a young cowboy who showed up and decided to stay. Thank you for supporting this remarkable woman I married, for helping her build something that's lasted half a century. And thank you for being the kind of community that makes life worth living." He looked at Natalie, his expression softening. 50 years ago, I caught this woman before she fell, and I've been catching her ever since. She catches me too, though, in all the ways that matter. That's what we've built, what we've been to each other. Partners, best friends, the loves of each other's lives. "I didn't know what love was until I met Samuel," Natalie said, her voice clear despite the emotion evident in every word. "He taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, that letting someone take care of you doesn't diminish what you can give to others. He made me stronger, not by trying to change me, but by supporting exactly who I was meant to be." She looked out at the crowd, at patients she'd treated, children she'd helped bring into the world, families she'd seen through crisis after crisis. "We've been blessed beyond measure. Not with riches, but with purpose and love and community. Thank you for being part of our story." The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Children ran wild while their parents talked and laughed. The elderly sat in chairs brought out from the church, watching and reminiscing. And at the center of it all, Natalie and Samuel danced, moving slowly to a fiddle's tune, lost in each other despite the crowd around them. "Still the best thing I ever did," Samuel murmured in her ear. "Convincing you to let me take care of you." "Still the best thing I ever did," Natalie replied, saying yes. They lived another 15 years after that celebration. 15 years of watching grandchildren grow, of teaching and passing on what they knew, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings spent together. Samuel's health began to fail first, his heart growing weak, and Natalie tended him with all the skill she'd spent a lifetime developing and all the love of 5 decades together. "I'm not afraid," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching another Colorado sunset paint the sky. "Of what?" she asked, though she knew. "Dying. I'm not afraid because I know I've lived the best life possible. I loved you, I was loved by you, we built something beautiful together. What more could a man ask for?" Tears ran down Natalie's face, but she didn't try to hide them. "I'm afraid. Afraid of being without you." "You won't be without me," Samuel said, taking her hand. "I'll be in every sunrise, every mountain breeze, every horse's gentle eye. I'll be in our children and grandchildren, in the legacy we built together. And when it's your time, I'll be waiting." He died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, with Natalie holding his hand. The town mourned the passing of a man who had been a cornerstone of their community, who had supported his wife's work and built a successful business and raised children who carried on his values. The church overflowed at his funeral, and they buried him in the small cemetery on a hill with a view of the mountains he'd loved. Natalie survived him by 5 years, long enough to see Jacob become the finest doctor in the territory, to see Rose's daughter take over the ranch, to see the clinic celebrate its 50th anniversary. She remained sharp and present until the end, still occasionally consulting on difficult cases, still teaching the next generation of healers. On a spring morning in 1937, at the age of 77, Natalie Carson Turner died quietly in her sleep, and if anyone had been there, they might have seen her smile just before the end, as if greeting someone she'd been waiting to see again. They buried her next to Samuel, and on the shared headstone was engraved simply, "Partners in life, in love, in service, together forever." Jacob stood at his mother's grave after the funeral, his own children and grandchildren around him, and told the story one more time. about the herbalist who healed for free, about the cowboy who said, "Let me take care of you," about how love and service and partnership could build something that lasted beyond a single lifetime. "They changed this town," he said. "Changed all of us. My mother saved lives with her medicine, but what she and my father showed us about love and dedication and taking care of each other, that saved souls." The clinic still stands in Westcliffe, Colorado, now a respected medical center that serves the entire region. Above the door is a plaque that reads, "Founded by Natalie Carson Turner, herbalist and healer, who taught us that medicine is not just about curing the body, but healing the whole person. And by Samuel Turner, who showed us that the greatest love is found in service to others." Their story became legend, passed down through generations, a testament to what can happen when two people find each other at exactly the right moment and choose, every single day, to build something beautiful together. The struggling herbalist and the cowboy who wouldn't let her struggle alone created a legacy that outlasted them both. Proof that love, real love, changes not just two lives but entire communities, rippling outward in ways that can never be fully measured. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows down from the mountains, old-timers in Westcliffe swear they can still see them sometimes. Two figures walking hand in hand through the streets, the herbalist and her cowboy, still together, still watching over the town they helped build, still showing everyone who remembers their story what true love really looks like.